Trupp. Welcome to the program. This is a series called Beyond the Boat that includes steps to kayaking. It's paired with another program we run called Keys to Avoiding Deep Trouble, which we had 2 Fridays ago with Keith Braun. And in this particular program, we focus on the tools, the skills, and the sea personship required to really get in and to make the most of sea kayaking if you're looking to get into the sport and or take your paddling to the next level. Today's subject is self-rescue techniques, and it's the key to self-confidence and safety in a sea kayak. Let's start with a really great introduction, a warm introduction, if you will, to our special guest here. I'm going to turn this to speaker view, and I want to welcome Cole Slusarenko, who's coming in from El Calafate, Argentina. Cole is a level 3 TRAK pilot, a long-time brand champion and advocate. He really helps us out a lot. He's one of the stars along with Zach Cruzens of the TRAK Foundations program and has really contributed to that. He's also, in addition to being a kayak instructor and a kayak guide and a coach, he's also a surfer. He loves to surf on boards and his kayak. He's a very experienced scuba diver and scuba diver guide. And he's been working professionally in tourism as a sea kayak guide since about 2015. Where he really started his journey as a coach and sharing his passion and experience for the love of a sport that he's really adopted as a really great way to connect with the water that he's so in love with. He's done with tracks he's been involved in for a long time. He's done a complete circumnavigation of Cortez Island with fellow TRAK pilot Zach Cruzens, which is where he got really turned on to TRAK. And folks might remember Zach Cruzens from our last episode, who was really speaking in depth about the 5 points of kayak in a boat. And in that experience, it really opened his eyes as to what a TRAK could be. And he's loved skills development. He's been involved in TRAK skills development camps as a co-instructor at the Tofino Surf Camp. And he single-handedly ran one of our discovery camps out around the Gulf Islands. And so please join me in welcoming Cole Slusarenko. Thank you, Cole. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Hans, for that incredibly warm introduction. Yeah, I like the water a lot. Definitely where I'm most comfortable. That trip around Cortez with Zach Cruzens in the TRAK, beauty trip. That will go down in history for sure. And it's been a pleasure being involved with TRAK over the years. So yeah, I'm very excited to be here.
Cool. Let's accelerate to where you are now exactly. Tell us, where are you at this moment?
Totally. So right now I am in El Calafate, Argentina. That's about 2,000 kilometers north of Antarctica. So it's very south. It's about 50 degrees south latitude. I am near the southern Patagonia ice field, which is the 3rd largest reserve of frozen fresh water in the world. So,
oh, terrific. So you're down in Argentina, and what brought you down there exactly?
This season, I've been working as a sea kayak guide, helping a new company down here develop a tourism product, taking adventure travelers down the Rio Santa Cruz River, which is the largest free-flowing river in Argentina. Last year in January, myself, Zach Cruzens, and Ken Storm, we paddled from the Andes Mountains to the Atlantic Ocean via the Rio Santa Cruz in our TRAK kayaks. So given that expedition and that experience, the employer of this company, Patagonia Profunda, decided that I would be somebody good to kind of help start their new program on the Rio Santa Cruz.
Terrific. As I remember, Cole, that was actually the maiden expedition of the TRAK 2.0, was it not?
It was. Okay. Yeah, we beat the hell out of those boats.
All right. Well, we'll save that for another story. So it sounds like you went down to Patagonia. You're on the frontier. You've worked with a number of companies down there: Bigfoot Patagonia, Agua Fresca, Patagonia Profunda, all working with adventure travelers. Tell us about the kind of waters you're paddling on exactly.
Down here in Patagonia, it's typically glacial lakes, so very cold water. Anytime we're getting on the water, we are wearing dry suits. We're wearing thermals underneath those dry suits. So cold water paddling, high consequence. So that's what I'm paddling on down here in Patagonia. And in the summer, I am paddling up around Vancouver Island, so quite warm. Typically not wearing dry suits if we're just going out for leisurely paddles. But if we're doing skills development, we're wearing dry suits.
Sure. Terrific. It sounds like, for a professional guide like you, what's up next is a little bit up in the air as tourism has come to a screeching halt. And as a full-time guide, it's probably hard to kind of pin down where your next instructing and coaching opportunities are going to lie. But let's talk about your other interest. You're the founder of We Thrive Outdoors. That's an organization that really helps professionals connect with work and get outside doing what they love. You clearly are in this with both feet. What do you like most about coaching?
For me, I remember when I was first getting started with sea kayaking and adventure tourism, it was something very new to me. There was a lot I didn't understand. I struggled with a lot of things. And now as I've progressed into the sport, I can see where people are struggling with things, and I can help get them through those struggles and help them gain that confidence and competence. And so for me, it's just empowering people to enjoy the sport of sea kayaking, getting more people on the water. Water is wellness.
Terrific, fantastic. A couple of comments I'm getting from the chat room here, Cole, about you. Sounds like folks love the stash, and a comment from Judith about how gorgeous El Calafate is. Sounds like there are worse places to be, spending the winter due to travel restrictions. So, sounds like some folks have an appreciation about where you are. So today we're going to talk about self-rescue techniques, Cole. Why is this so important?
Well, like you said earlier, Hans, the self-rescue is the key to confidence and competence on the water. Said in another way, the self-rescue is to an extent independence on the water, right? Okay. So the self-rescue, it is just kind of one of the many variables that a kayaker has to consider when making the most important decision a kayaker can make, which is whether it's safe to paddle or not.
Terrific. Okay. So let's that's a really tremendous insight there. This really boils down to the assessment of the ongoing assessment of whether you can actually do a self-rescue in the eventuality of a capsize to determine whether or not you get in the water. So it sounds like a lot of experience and understanding of all your options are critical in that decision-making process.
Totally. We're paddling on a huge sea in a huge body of water, and we're paddling in a very small craft. You're very much at the mercy of Mother Nature, Pachamama. So we need to respect it.
Cool. Well, let's break that down a little bit, Cole, at a high level. What really are the criteria that you should consider when you think about the viability of self-rescue?
Absolutely. So many different self-rescue. It doesn't matter so much which self-rescue you choose, but it should meet some criteria. And that is your self-rescue should be reliable, meaning that you've practiced it in given conditions and with the boat that you're going to be paddling in. It should be timely. A golden standard for that is less than 2 minutes. You don't want to be in the water for over 2 minutes. And lastly, it should be effective. It should be done with as little energy requirement as possible, right? So you want to conserve that valuable energy. Those are the three.
Great. Okay. So you'd mentioned those criteria. Let's back up a little bit. You'd mentioned that also that self-rescue is critical in the decision-making process with risk management. How do you mitigate the risk on both personal trips and private trips as a guide and a coach?
Totally. You really need to bring into consideration all the variables, which can be summed up in the decision-making triangle. I will just bring that up now. This is an asset that TRAK has produced. It's an amazing asset. I highly recommend you guys get access to this. It contains, weather, sea state, route and terrain, and human factors. So, to answer your question, Hans, when I'm considering self-rescue and I'm making the decision whether it's safe to paddle or not, I'm taking in all the consideration, right? So I'm thinking about sea state. I'm thinking about the temperature of the water. What equipment do we have to paddle in? Are we paddling in neoprene wetsuits? Or are we paddling in dry suits? What's the weather? How strong is the wind blowing? If the wind is blowing strong and I think there's a potential for a capsize and we're wearing neoprene wetsuits, I might cancel that tour. But if we're wearing dry suits, then I might say, you know what? If we have a capsize, I know from my experience that I can get that person back into the boat within X amount of time and I can keep people safe. And that's how I make the decision.
Okay, so it sounds like one key point to managing risk is to paddle defensively, to paddle within your limits, and to have an accurate self-perception for any given condition about paddling. What else?
We're talking about capsize prevention.
We're talking about just that capsize prevention. How do you mitigate the risk of that on personal trips and professional trips?
Yeah, so paddling defensively, I mean, it's going to, refer back to the decision-making triangle. So the equipment you're wearing, also not paddling in conditions that you're not trained for, right? So you should be able to perform a self-rescue in the conditions that you're paddling in. Also, knowing where you're going, right? So having a nautical chart, looking at what waters are going to be protected from strong winds.
Sure.
Areas of fetch are.
Yeah, so let's put all that into one bucket as paddling defensively. That's the preparation that Keith Braun talked about extensively in our Keys to Avoiding Deep Trouble in our last call. Previous to that, Zach had talked in a previous call about the 5 points of contact and really emphasized how strong boat control leads to a good forward stroke. How valuable is the strong boat control and forward stroke in risk management?
Absolutely. So, the level of boat control that you're going to need varies as the conditions. Your ability to control yourself in your kayak is extremely important. And that forward stroke is what's giving you that constant momentum and that constant stability. So they essential.
Cool. We've got somebody from the waiting room here. It looks like chopping in. That self-rescue is critical in risk management process. Let me know if you want to need a copy. That's from Curtis. So that's certainly available. Curtis, you could put that link into the chat room. That would be super helpful. And we talked about that extensively as well in that. So the other thing that Cole, it sounds like that I remember from you really focusing on in our last surf camp is really that reflexive low and high brace recovery with regard to that as kind of another big element, developing that skill set for risk mitigation. How valuable is that?
That is hugely important. As you are developing the skills to self-rescue, developing the skills to prevent the capsize from happening in the first place will get you so much farther. An ounce of prevention is worth 10 pounds of cure. So if you can prevent yourself from making that capsize in the first place, you're going to be much farther ahead. So practicing the low brace and the high brace to a level where they become unconscious is going to keep you very safe on the water.
Okay, cool. Awesome. I'm just adding those 3 points that you just uncovered here into the chat room. And it sounds like they are paddle defensively, really maintain strong boat control and a forward stroke, and having a really reflexive low and high brace recovery are preventative measures.
Absolutely.
Cool. The other thing here is, and then you've established that there are 3 kind of criteria we should consider with regard to self-rescue, and that is it should be really reliable, practiced in a given set of conditions, it should be timely, and it should be effective. Let's unpack those a little bit. When you say reliable, practiced in given conditions, what do you mean exactly?
Well, you should be getting out on a regular basis in whatever boat you're planning to paddle in, and running through your self-rescue, whether that's a cow person scramble or paddle float rescue. You want to do these in controlled conditions with a partner, somebody who can be there with you, and going through the motions of it and practicing it well enough that, you don't have to be thinking about it in the moment when you're in a real life situation dealing with a self-rescue.
Okay, so make sure that basically when you're considering to paddle, that when you look at those conditions, that you know that you've actually done a self-rescue in that level of condition, and going into that with confidence that you know what it's going to be like in that.
Absolutely.
Okay, terrific. The next thing you said was timely. Unpack that one a little bit. What do you mean? What sort of benchmark could we use in terms of timeliness for a self-rescue?
Totally. Well, you know what? It really kind of depends on the water that you're paddling in. If you're paddling in Hawaii, you're paddling in the tropics, and you've got, water that's 25 degrees, the amount of time that you spend in the water probably isn't as important. But, if you're like some of us who are paddling in environments with very cold water, it's very important to spend as minimal time in the water as possible. And guys, we're kayaking. We want to be spending our time with our butt in our kayaks, not outside of our kayaks or upside down. So 2 minutes is kind of like the golden standard. Okay,
great. So the target for timeliness is really kind of setting it up so that you can do it within a couple of minutes. If you're paddling cold water, I know that hypothermia starts to set in if you're paddling in my local waters within a minute. Really get to know, I guess, local waters and take water temperature into consideration when you think about that. So 2 minutes is not a lot of time. That sounds like you've got to be relatively proficient to be able to do that. And that definitely takes practice. The third thing you said was effective. And what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so, there should be an effective kind of step-by-step process for what you do when you come out of your kayak. You don't want to have to reinvent the wheel every time you come out. So by having a step-by-step process that you follow every time, you in your kayak effectively, right? You're not expending too much energy. You're not going to knock off essential equipment from your kayak. Just getting into your boat A to Z.
Okay, terrific. So really systematized.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. All right, cool. And you'd also mentioned a minimum amount of energy. So I guess that's part of effectiveness too, is really making sure that the system that you've decided on is going to use as little energy as possible, and to think about how you adopt any sort of personalized self-rescue protocol for yourself, that for your body type, for your boat, that it's going to take as little energy as possible. So you're really looking for opportunities for efficiency there.
Yeah. And, you need to consider the more energy that you're spending on trying to get yourself back into your boat, the more energy it's taking away from your ability to make good decisions. So, now you've had a self-rescue in a real situation. If you expend all your energy and you get into your kayak and you're tired, it's going to be difficult for you to make a decision for yourself and for other people and keep those people safe.
Okay, great. So let's dive into this and let's talk about some elements of an effective self-rescue. Cole, you had, we kind of spoke a little bit about this, and part of what we've offered as a Beyond the Boat is a series of broken down skills that are delivered in a PDF infographic to help people really wrap their heads around it. One of the key things that we talked about as fundamental is getting out of the boat upon a capsize. Let's call that the wet exit, if you will. Let's talk about that as a first point of effective self-rescue. And I'm going to post a link in the chat here to a self-rescue PDF or a wet exit PDF, so people can follow along with that exactly. Tell us about as a guide, how do you teach people about the wet exit, and how's that relevant?
Yes, certainly. So just to clarify, we're talking about just the wet exit, or the wet exit with the return into the kayak?
Let's talk about the wet exit as the first element, and then we'll break down and understand what some of those other things are.
Totally. Well, a wet exit that's going to be controlled and practiced, could start off with, having positive control of your paddle, taking a nice deep controlled breath, going over, banging 3 times on the bottom of your hull, going to the sides of your boat, finding your grab loop on your spray skirt, giving that a pull, and then pushing out of your cockpit, and then coming out of the cockpit with positive control of your boat and your paddle. So that would be like a practiced controlled wet exit. Now, if you're doing this kind of in a real life situation, it's essentially the same, just coming out with positive control of your boat and your paddle. That's really the key.
Terrific, fantastic. We've got a great question here from TRAK Pilot Keith Braun. He's curious about your opinion from your experience with beginners. What is the most effective self-rescue with the highest rate of success? We're going to go into that question, but that's a great segue. So we've done an effective wet exit. What's the next part once we're out of our boat that's critical? And I have put into the chat a link to the wet exit informational PDF for folks to take a look at that has both skills tips and best practices along with the 4 steps that Cole just described.
Absolutely. So once you've wet exited your boat, you're left with a couple of options, 3 options. You can re-enter your boat and roll, which we're not really going to cover on this call. Then you have 2 other self-rescues. You have your cow person scramble and you have your paddle float rescue. So you've wet exited, you've got positive control of your boat and your blade. You're going to right your boat. You're going to turn your boat the right side up. If I'm referring to the cow person scramble, I'm going to take my paddle and I'm going to move to the stern section, the rear of my boat. I'm going to get nice and low on the water. I'm going to kick and jump horizontally so I land my chest flat on the back of my boat. I'm then going to turn my body, position myself so I'm looking up toward the bow, the front of the kayak. I'm going to stay nice and low, and I'm going to, with my paddle, I'm going to army crawl up along until I can sit my butt back into my seat. I'm going to find my 3 points of contact in the kayak, feet on the pedals, knees bracing the thigh braces, my butt in the seat, regal posture. And then I'm then going to secure my paddle, secure everything on my deck, and I'm going to pump with purpose. Pump all that water out of my boat, spray skirt back on, paddle in hand, ready to go. So that's the breakdown for your cow person scramble.
Okay, so let me get this right. So it sounds like you just broke that down into 7 steps of an effective self-rescue with the cowboy scramble. 1 is a really safe wet exit.
Yes.
2, it sounds like really securing all your gear. 3 is righting your boat. 4 is maneuvering back into the boat, and that's where you're talking about using the cowboy scramble exactly as one technique.
Yes.
And to answer Keith's question then, is the cowboy scramble the most effective self-rescue reentry for beginners to get back into your boat?
Absolutely. And so to answer that, I'll just touch on the pros and cons of the cow person scramble, which is the pro is, when practiced well, it can be performed within 2 minutes from my experience and what I've seen new paddlers do. That's what we do on our level 1 Paddle Canada programs. The con is that there is a certain amount of flexibility and balance that comes with the cow person scramble. So, depending on the body type of the paddler, sometimes that flexibility and balance isn't achieved in a short window of time, for example, a couple of days. Sometimes there needs to be, a couple weeks of continued practice, morning yoga, stretching, to get the body mechanics right to make the cow person scramble work. In that case, I find that people with a different kind of body type that have the flexibility, that have a problem with the flexibility and balance, they have a higher success rate with the paddle float rescue.
Okay, great. So so it sounds like the 2 options here we're offered that we're suggesting here are 1, the cowboy or cowgirl scramble, and the advantages are there's no other equipment required, and it's relatively fast and easy to get into the boat.
Yeah.
It sounds like the second technique you're proposing is the paddle float rescue, which does require another piece of equipment. It provides more stability, but it's not as fast because there's an equipment setup piece required.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Well, I'd love to poll folks in this chat. Let me know what's your favorite of those two rescues if you're using them, whether it's the Cowboy Scramble or the Paddle Float Rescue. And I believe we've covered both of these in the TRAK Foundations program. So folks can go into TRAK Foundations. They can actually see a video tutorial of these and walk through both of those rescues and how they're most effectively pulled off. Sounds like we've got some folks using both paddle float and working on which is best for them. So Cole, what I will do here then is let's talk a little bit about the paddle float rescue. Then it sounds like it's worth just touching on it as that's folks go to. Walk us through your version of the paddle float rescue.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the paddle float rescue, it all starts off kind of the same as the cow person scramble, safe wet exit with positive control of your paddle and your boat. You're going to get your boat turned right side up. At this point, rather than scrambling up the back of your deck, you're going to use a paddle float, a buoyancy aid, to aid you in the re-entry of your kayak. So essentially, you're going to take your paddle float, which could be a chunk of foam, a big square piece of foam, or an inflatable paddle float, and you're going to place that kind of just on the end of your paddle. And then by using your paddle with now this buoyant aid on the end of it, you're going to kind of get your paddle there to a 90-degree angle. Yeah, configure it to your boat like that. And this is where you would be in the water, and you'd want to jump up onto your stern deck here. I don't know if that illustration is an aid for you guys, but basically it's allowing you to put additional weight on one side of your boat so you can kick and jump up, and you can still keep one hand on that paddle and that blade, and then hook the boat, rotate back in your cockpit.
Yeah, Kathy sounded off about how the paddle float and the heel hook are essential for her. So that heel hook is key, and the paddle float helps you do that to give you an extra advantage to climbing back into the boat. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions here, and I think we answered your question, Keith, that it depends. His favorite one depends on a body type, and maybe has to do with some of the water and the speed at which you got to get out of the water. It sounds like you also, by your notes, if you found the scramble is also the fastest reentry, but the paddle float offers the highest success rate, especially for beginners. Great comment there, Keith. This is really fantastic. We got like all these great opinions from leading TRAK pilots here, both on video and in the chat. It sounds like we've got one big question here from Rebecca, and that is that her biggest question is if you don't have the sea-sock in and just the flotation bags, how do you get the water out before you re-enter or after? No matter whether you're in cold water for a while, at least you're working so hard you're sort of warm. So before we dive into that, let me just talk about the sea-sock for a second, Cole, because not everybody here is a TRAK owner. But one thing that's unique about TRAKs is because they're a portable boat, they're collapsible, they don't have any bulkheads in them. And when you have a boat that's not a bulkheaded boat, it is a best practice to use a sea-sock. For every single non-bulkheaded boat, this is a best practice for sure. What that does is it provides a container at which you can have water intrusion, and you typically don't have any more intrusion than the sea-sock. So you manage how much water you would actually have to bail. You also manage the buoyancy of the boat. And so that's pretty critical. I'll just put out there that it's a best practice if you have a non-bulkheaded boat, a TRAK or not, that a sea-sock is a best practice. And for the folks that don't know, it's just a liner for your cockpit that you can put in. They sort of have a continuum of appreciation all the way from being called sea sucks to being a nice, cozy, warm blanket you get to go paddle with and nobody makes fun of you. that's it. We'd recommend the Seasock, but let's talk about that, Cole. Let's talk about water management and with regard to maybe riding the boat and about pumping. Do you pump before or do you pump after?
If I can, I won't, like if I wet exit my boat, I prefer not to pump. I can do a bow thrust the bow up, which allows all the water from the cockpit to drain out from the seat. So lift the bow up and then kind of a little flick and then right the boat, and I can actually get back into a boat that has no water in it. But if I'm not able to do that, then I will get back into the boat and then pump it out.
Oh, fantastic. So there's a pro tip for us. The pro tip is to get to the bow of the boat as you're reorienting it to weather before you get in it, and to lift the bow, and that spills out some water from the back. Yeah. A little bit of it to help make to advantage. And then you get in the boat to get in the water, to get out of the water, to get stable fast, and then you pump like mad.
That's it.
Okay, terrific. And so a couple of comments here. One is Christopher saying that the flick is a little bit tricky with the TRAK. Any pro tips there, Cole?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if, getting the bow kind of close to your shoulder, kick with your legs. Like if you're kind of standing in the water, you're going to kick up, help you get better lift. Also, you can use, if you've got the paddle float, you can hold the paddle float by your other ear, which gives you a bit of extra buoyancy. You just need a good push up. Also, what tends to happen is the cockpit will create a seal on the water. So sometimes what you need to do is you just need to kind of crack the bow a little bit, and it creates it releases the airlock, and then you can push up and give it that flick. It's one of those things that just needs practice.
Okay, great. So I'm getting more clear on this. It sounds like you're actually doing the bow lift while the boat's still inverted.
Yes, the boat is up and I'm lifting it up.
Okay, great. Keith is sounding off about Seasocks here. He says they're very comfortable, adds extra insulation, but the user needs to practice with them if they're going to be included in the rescues and be really familiar with them. Super great point there, Keith. And with the TRAKs, the newer Seasocks do have clip points, so you can clip out your toe box, which makes it a little bit easier for getting back in. JP has suggested the Cowboy Scramble works really well. And when he's more tired, maybe the paddle float. Also a rescue sling. Touch just briefly on the rescue sling, if you will there, Cole.
I don't have any personal experience using a rescue sling for a self-rescue. But an assisted rescue, it can work quite well if you've got somebody who you're having a lot of difficulty getting them back into their boat. It's kind of like a step up into their boat. But I don't have experience with it.
Okay. Yeah, I've used one a lot. I've trained with one a lot, and it's just a pre-made piece of. I usually like to use a webbing. I use 1/2-inch webbing tape with a water knot on it, and it's pre-tied to go around the cockpit coaming and just hang in the water at just the right height for me to step into and get up onto my boat. But I prefer the Cowboy Scramble personally. One comment to Curtis here. Curtis, looks like you're commenting to everyone in the waiting room. You might repost these to everyone on the call, not just everyone in the waiting room on that. We've got some other great comments here. Zach is pointing out that it can be difficult to get back in, but practice is the real key. In calmer conditions and a bigger sea, of course, it's a little bit more challenging. So we've got some great points here. So let me just recap this, Cole, if I can.
Absolutely.
So the 7 elements of the self-rescue are: 1, a very effective wet exit. We've got a document that helps describe that. The second step is to secure all your gear, orient your boat, secure all your gear so that you've got everything you might need, and nothing's floating away. Second is to right your boat. And when I'm hearing for righting your boat, one of the pro tips is, as you're riding your boat into the wind and the sea state, to actually, before you right it, to actually lift the bow and to help drain some of the water out so you don't scoop water into it as you ride it. Did I get that right?
Not exactly. So, one option is just to right your boat, and the cockpit will have some water in it, and you can get into that cockpit and then drain that out with a pump.
Okay.
Depending on what the conditions are, and if you have the energy, you can empty the water out of the cockpit before you get in.
Okay, so either way, you tip your boat, you spill some of the water out, you right the boat into the wind, and then you maneuver back into the boat. And you've offered two techniques. The two techniques that you're suggesting are very reliable. Is the cowboy scramble or cowgirl scramble, and the advantage of that is it's fast, it doesn't take any equipment, and the other technique is the paddle float rescue, which can give you more leverage, more stability for getting back in the boat, especially using the heel hook. But the problem is it can take a little bit longer because you've got to set it up, and secondly, you've actually got to have the gear of the paddle float to make it work. And then it sounds like the next thing is to really reorganize. Step 6, reorganize yourself in the boat, organize your gear, pump like you mean it, and then regain control of the boat. What do you mean by regain control of the boat?
Regain control of the boat, just as in boat control. So having your 3 points of contact, having a kind of 360-degree awareness of what's happening on the water, what the sea state is like, wind direction, paddle in hand, gaining that stability through a forward stroke.
Okay. The other thing, key thing to that is the spray skirt, is getting the spray skirt back on. So I guess one thing I'll add here is when we talk about pumping the boat, because this has been a big topic here, I pump water out, and I won't pump all of that, but I'll get some water out of it, and then I'll put my spray skirt back on. And then either I will pull the side of the spray skirt over to get the pump in so I can minimize how much water is coming back in my boat. I pump like mad through the hole in the spray skirt on the side, or if I'm using a TRAK spray skirt, they're outfitted with the sleeves that allow you, the ports, to access the jacks, but also is a great device for putting the pump in to pump water out.
Yeah, that sleeve is great. It's a great sleeve for pumping.
Okay, great. Nolan's got a question here. How about the technique in rough water of finding your re-entry technique, putting the boat without emptying, putting the spray skirt on, make sure no water's coming in, then use the bilge pump to get to the middle. I think that's what we just discussed, Nolan, but thanks for your point there. Terrific. And so one question is, how do you pump and stabilize with the paddle at the same time? That's from Richard.
So was that a question for me?
Yeah, that's a question for you. How do you pump and stabilize the paddle at the same time?
How do I pump and stabilize at the same time? Yeah, that's difficult. If I'm pumping, I'm going to slip my paddle under one of my bungees, and I'm just going to use my hips and keep nice loose hips, and just pump out as fast as I can. And yeah, it's very difficult to do the two at the same time. I've tried.
Another good reason to evacuate some of the water at first, and then regain control of the boat, get it oriented into the sea state, and then you can evacuate the rest of the water.
Totally. I mean, if you've got your cockpit is half full, for sure, before you try to paddle anywhere, you should try to get some of that water out. As soon as you get down to maybe 25%, make sure that skirt's on. I would be using my sleeve to be making sure no other waves are crashing into my boat. Close that sleeve up, paddle up into the wind, find somewhere more protected, and then can pump the rest of that water out.
Okay, terrific. Bruce Unterman is asking, with the Cowboy Scramble and the spray spurt getting, actually Bruce says this, he says, with the Cowboy Scramble, the port in the spray skirt was getting stuck on the boat when I was going forward. How do you avoid that? I'm not sure I understand Bruce's question here. So Bruce, I'm going to unmute you here just to kind of sound off on that one.
Hi. So yeah, that sleeve or whatever you were talking about pumping through, that was getting caught on parts of the boat when I was coming forward, so I was getting stopped, and so I didn't know how to avoid that getting stuck.
Yeah, good question, Bruce. I think for me, you've got a roll up part, and I think that's getting stuck. It sounds like I just punched that one through and let it be on the inside, so it's nice and clean and flush. The other key thing that I'll just say about your pumps with regard to seesaw use is that most pumps suck from the bottom of the pump, and with a seesaw, if you're trying to do that, you can't really pull anything through it because it's going to draw up and seal against the seesaw. So our recommendation is certainly to get a pump that has a little flange on the end, like a strainer, and drill holes into that, and use that pump that you can pump. Level 6 has a really good one that you can order online. It's got a flange on it. You can, with a 1/4-inch drill bit, you can put 4 or 5 holes in it, and then you can use that with a seesaw very, very effectively. That's pretty critical, is making sure that your pump works with your seesaw.
I think there was one other part of Bruce's question we missed too. I think, Bruce, you were saying when you're making your cowperson scramble, the spray skirt and that port, it's getting kind of caught in the way of things on your deck while you're trying to get in. One thing that I will do to make sure my skirt doesn't get in the way, because that's one thing that happens a lot, is you can take the end of the skirt, like your grab loop, and you can kind of stuff it between the arm of your PFD, stuff it into your PFD, or if you have to, bite on the end of your skirt just to keep it up, so it's not in the way of your legs. Yeah, that'll get in the way.
Oh, that's a great question. I get it. So his spray skirt was hanging him up from getting back in his boat. Yeah. The other trick I learned from Keith Braun on that one, you see this, a lot of kayakers do this. They keep a carabiner clipped on their PFD. And systematically, Keith Braun, whenever he gets out of his boat, he just takes that spray skirt and he clips it onto his carabiner, and he's always like that. So as soon as he's out of his boat, he just secures his spray skirt like that on his carabiner, on his PFD. Great way to set up for that, Bruce, so you don't have to put your teeth on it. You can just clip it in. So I'd recommend that piece of outfitting. So when you see, kayak geeks walking around with carabiners on their shoulder, it's not just to look cool. It's actually a good storage area to secure your spray skirt. We've got some other comments on that. It sounds like that's a pretty popular technique. We've got from Kathy here, so another addition is if you're using the paddle float rescue, you can use the float to help keep you stable while you're pumping as well. We're going to open this up in just a minute here for questions and allowing people to come on and open their mics like Bruce did here. I want to just do one last recap of that. The 7 elements of self-rescue, Cole. Let's take it from the top. A safe wet exit, secure your gear, right your boat, maneuver back into the boat by one of 2 techniques. And it sounds like we should both try both of them, figure out which is faster for us, which is more reliable for us, and which is more effective in terms of minimizing how much energy it takes to get back in the boat. And know which one we're going to use for different conditions. And then it sounds like the next 2 steps of that is to really reorganize yourself and be really clear on how you're going to pump as much water out as you can, know when to stop, and regain control so that you can come back and drain the rest of your boat. Because in many cases, you don't have to get 100% of the water out. You got to get enough water out that the boat can actually respond well to your forward stroke, that you can get control, that you can take a breath, you can relax for a minute, maybe find shelter, and then get the rest of the water out. And then that's kind of the sequence. Did I get all that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Great. Fantastic. And the gold standard for this, it sounds like, in terms of timeliness, is really go out and practice that so that you can do that within 2 minutes.
Or in less time that the gators can't get you.
Okay. So how would you summarize the key points then of your overall, comments besides the seven elements we just reviewed?
The key points, know Know your self-rescue in any conditions, in any boat that you plan to paddle in. And make sure that the people that you're paddling with know where they are at as well, and you know where they are.
Okay, so it sounds like one of the key things is to ensure that your self-rescue skills are effective, timely, and reliable for any conditions that you would choose to paddling and any boat you would paddle in, and that you're clear that with any paddling partners you're paddling with, that they know their limits and you know their limits as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, so it sounds like it's a really great action item, if you will, to get with your paddling buddy and to practice these together and to practice these in the conditions that you guys agree that you're willing to paddle in. Cool. You'd mentioned earlier the use of the decision-making triangle as a great tool for risk management. We talked about this a little bit with the call last week with Keith Braun, but it sounds like with that, you're really using that as a tool to, decide, is it safe to paddle or not?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't exactly use this framework. I have kind of like a little phrase that I have, it exists up in my mind that I always refer to. It's kind of a little bonus tip for you guys. It's me, we, the weather, and the sea. So that's kind of the framework that the lens that I'm making all my decisions through. I think about me, my ability, my experience in the conditions that I'm going out into. I think about I think about everybody in my group. Where is their experience? What's the risk level? I'm looking up at the weather. I'm getting a sense of what the wind is doing and looking at the sea state. So this is a great framework to have. Print it, laminate it, have it in your kit, have it in your nautical chart bag, or just remember me, we, the weather, and the sea also can work well.
Okay, terrific. That's really fantastic. Thank you for that, Cole. You're fantastic. So first of all, I just want to thank you for spending so much time here with our group here and for your pro tips and your kind of foundational comments. How do people learn more with you now and follow you exactly? And I want to just share that, and then I want to share about an interesting new opportunity that TRAK is putting out here for as early as next week.
Yeah, I just like to say I would love to hear back from anybody. Anybody has any personal questions for me, recommendations or trips or anything. Connect with me on Instagram. My Instagram handle is Kayak Cole. I'm the only Kayak Cole on Instagram. Also, you can connect with me on Facebook. Facebook is just Cole Slusarenko. And that's the best way to get a hold of me. Yeah, also email wethriveoutdoors@gmail.com.
Okay, cool. I've just put those links to your email address, the Instagram that you noted, and your personal email out to the world here. Cole, thanks for that. I guess the one thing I'd love to announce here is that, Cole, we have just announced just on this call that we're going to be doing here is we have packaged a Sea Kayak Skills Accelerator program. I want to thank you in advance for doing this, but I'm going to put a link in the chat right now to everyone, is that Cole is going to be leading a 4-video session, 4-month virtual coaching program that's limited to 15 participants, where they can jump on, and it's kind of positioned as a do-it-together version of going through the TRAK Foundations program. So Cole can be your guide in going through the Foundations program that he and Zach helped to establish, and give you weekly challenges and a community of a mastermind community. Basically, it's going to be a boot camp approach to developing as a paddler. It's going to have an exclusive chat room for supporting questions and sharing accomplishments, and it's going to be based on the TRAK Foundations learning program and progression. So if you want to learn more from Cole, you can do that. He's in Argentina. You can't paddle with him very easily, but you can get online with him. So that link is in the chat room. If anybody's interested in that, jump on that. The other thing that I will put a link in here to is that for folks that want to do it on their own, all the things that we talked about today are covered in the TRAK Foundations program. It is an online learning platform where we break these skills down into video presentation. And as we're moving on here, we're starting to also add infographics like we linked to today with the wet exit piece there. So I'll give you that. At this point, we're going to open this up for discussions. And once again, Cole, I want to thank you. Let's everybody join me in a big round of applause and thank Cole for being here and for all your great insight.